This week, we are working on the fear of success. And so last week we were talking about self-sabotage, and I went through some of the basics around what are the root causes of self-sabotage? Why does that happen? So today, actually, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this because sometimes people will come see me and they'll say something like, oh, I have a fear of success, which is interesting to me because usually that is the sort of thing where the fear is actually something else. It just looks like their success. And so when somebody says to me, oh, I have a fear of success, but that kind of you know, like my little spidey senses go and I'm like, maybe it's actually responsibility. So today we're going to explore the fear of success, the fear of responsibility, and I'm going to just share some ways that I've witnessed people more or less either not hold responsibility, hold somebody else's responsibility, drop responsibility, or actually be unwilling to hold the level of responsibility that's required for her next level in business. So if you guys have been, listening or watching the show for a minute, you'll know that at the time of this recording, I'm currently only working with women who are scaling their businesses. And so I'm a wealth coach and I help them to get to that next level. Early next year, I expect to have other offers come out that are a little bit broader. But currently, all my attention is in limitless wealth. And so in doing this work, there's a tension that comes between expanding and wanting to stay the same. All right. So, like in last week's episode, we were talking about how when it's time to grow and expand our businesses and ourselves and get to that next level, we have to become, like a version of ourselves that can hold that bigger life, that bigger reality, that bigger job, responsibility, business. Right. And so today, anyways, let's just get into it. So responsibility is interesting because sometimes it's heavy and the responsibility is often the place where the power is. So if I'm responsible for XYZ, that's generally going to mean I have the decision-making authority and that's within my realm of authority. So I'm going to talk about 4 of the major reasons why people have I'm going to say trouble with responsibility. It may be the fear of responsibility. It may be like an unwillingness. So anyways, let's just get into that. So sometimes we have a hard relationship with responsibility, right? So I'll share with you guys. So part of my story is that I started working, I was working like several days a week as a babysitter when I was 11 years old. Right. And so I was holding a lot of responsibility and I put a lot of pressure on myself to hold that responsibility from the time that I was very young, right? And many of my clients have stories similar to that where maybe they were holding down like childcare responsibilities, cooking responsibilities, financial responsibilities for the house at a very young age. And so sometimes when we have a hard relationship with responsibility, we'll get to a point where we're so used to carrying so much. And oftentimes that means carrying other people's shit that we will get to a place where literally we don't want to or won't or can't carry any more responsibility. And I will also share that if this is the case for you, oftentimes my clients will have emotional clearing work to do around that because generally you don't take on an adult level of responsibility in a child situation unless like shit's kind of fucked up. So if you grew up in a place and time and whatever where you were doing a lot of adulting when you were still a kid, chances are there may be some resentment, there may be some like scary feelings or, whatever. And so I just want to say, so when I say this to you, if you're like, oh yeah, I've had a hard relationship with responsibility, a lot of times that requires some emotional clearing and some work on the relationship to be able to do this. And so I'm sharing all of these things with you so that way you can get to the place where you have the right responsibilities for you. So the next thing where I will see people will get kind of wonky in the relationship with responsibility is holding on to other people's responsibilities. And so some of this is going to come from a lack of emotional range. So let me give you an example. So let's just say, for example, I can't handle that you would be mad at me, or I can't handle that you'd be disappointed with me. And so I do all sorts of things to bend and contort and make sure that you feel a certain kind of way so I can be all right. All right. So I see this pretty often. And so some other words for what I'm talking about might be control or manipulation. Sounds a little negative, but it just is, right? So if you're holding responsibility for other people's feelings or words or actions, chances are what that's actually doing is, well, sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's we don't have the emotional range, and so we're going to try to control the outside environment. The problem with that is, one, it can be effective. Like you can get it done, but it comes at a super high cost. Like my clients, the people that I've worked with that have a lot of control issues, like they're generally so busy doing everything for everybody and making sure everybody else is in an emotionally okay state that, one, they're dysregulated, they're not emotionally well, and that comes with a seething resentment or bitterness or whatever else. But also it means that she doesn't have the energy to get her own work done, generally speaking. You know what I mean? Like that comes up. And so if you have a lot of your energy out in the world controlling, and trying to get other people to think or be a certain way, you're just not going to have you're not going to have that power to create whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. So it's not super effective. The other thing that I will see when people are holding a lot of somebody else's responsibility is, again, it's a fear response. It's a fear of being disappointed, a fear of being let down, a fear of being betrayed, fears of these sorts. And generally there's going to be a story that matches that survival mechanism or that survival response where you're going to hold everybody else's responsibility is generally going to have a hard story attached to it. So that's another way. But again, it's the same thing. It's like if you're holding all of these responsibilities for everybody else, then you don't have that power to do the things that are yours to do, right? So, all right. So we have a hard relationship with responsibility can kind of come up as a fear of responsibility, the holding others' responsibilities. Because then also the one other thing I'll say about holding other people's responsibilities is when you hold too much, like if you got a lot of your power out holding other people's shit, you want other people to hold your shit. And so it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, well, you'll be holding things for other people and then you'll be dying to give things away because what you've got going on is like so much. So these are things to consider about in your own relationship with responsibility. So another place that I will see some hard, some lessons in responsibility is around like staffing and delegating and giving up certain kinds of control. And this is a really a double-sided thing. So on one side, we have people that have a hard time delegating, have a hard time giving up control, can't trust other people to do their work. And then the other side of this, delegation thing is when we give up too much too soon, especially like in business before it's systemized, before there's results, and you're just like expecting, your VA or, an assistant or even like a marketing agency or something to like be doing, like essentially take over the responsibility of the success and not just the tasks, but like there's something like when I'm watching clients do it, I could be like, oh no, this isn't going to work. You've gone too far, too hands off, too fast. So anyways, there's a balance here. And so when it comes to the delegation of things, because really where we're going is, so if we want to have that next level, that really big life, well, we can't be holding on to 1,000 tiny responsibilities. We're going to have to let go of some of the responsibilities that other people can do and then hold on to bigger responsibilities. Now, if what's interesting is that we're building out the structure of our business, if nobody holds those responsibilities, the business just won't go anymore. Like, and I will see this like when somebody's got no systems for their monies, when they are owing a lot of back taxes, and they don't have a system or a plan on how to do that. Sometimes it will be like, yeah, just like where the business is a little, it might even be very successful, but it will be a little sloppy on the inside, right? Where it's like nothing's systemized, nobody knows where anything's going, and I need to be the person that touches everything to make it go. So these sorts of things are to me like generally a pretty good indication that somebody's got a little wonky relationship with responsibility. So the delegation bit, so what really, so it's like if you can't let go, you're going to be having your capacity for responsibility, holding on to things that are like essentially too small, and you're not going to be able to grow and expand because you're going to be using all of your energy on like the dotting of the T's and the crossing of the I's. And I said that backwards, but you know what I mean. And if we give too much away too fast, like if we have if we're giving away the keys to the kingdom too fast, generally what ends up happening is you just waste money. That's usually like you don't get the results that you wanted, and the money goes away and you're like, what happened here? And either way, in both examples, it's like the responsibility isn't being held, because the responsibility is kind of like the structure of the business, of the life. And I'm talking about this in terms of scaling a business, but the same thing goes like if you want a bigger house, if you want kids, you want a dog, right? Like there's responsibility that comes with these things. So what do we do about these things? So like if we know like, oh, all right, I have a hard relationship with responsibility, I can tell I have some control issues, delegating is hard for me, like what do we do about this? How do we get this to scale? So I have a few ideas that I'll talk about. And I just want to say, if you want to work with me, if you want to talk to me about your business and how to get your business to scale, how to get out of your own way, how to grow yourself to that next level of power and money, you can go into the show notes here and there'll be a link to book a call with me. And so we can set up a time to, and I'll just see how I can serve you. And then from there, if we want to work together, we can talk about it at that time. But I just want you to know, like, I have spaces available in my Limitless Wealth program, which is really about how do I handle the inner work of growth and expansion? How do I do that? Right. So we touch on strategy in the program because obviously our business model needs to be leveraged and lucrative. We need to have the right kinds of clients. We need to be dialed in and all of that sort of stuff. But so much of growth and expansion is really doing advanced mindset work, really expanding on the identity, really expanding our emotional range, really learning how to work with energetics, and really how to work with our nervous system capacity also. So anyways, all right. So I just want, my little uh my little plug, shameless plug. All right. So let's talk about what does it take to get to the right level of responsibility. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is really think about it. So you're going to be like, well, all right, well, at my next level, like where this business is going, or with whatever I want, what new responsibilities are coming online here, right? Like, because like, let's just say if I'm going to grow my team, right? I might need to grow my team, right? If I want to grow this business. All right, well then well, currently I don't have a very big team, so there's little management to do. But if I had a big team, well, there would need to be management. But that means there probably need to be SOPs and like processes and systems and shit, right? And so you can start to see, all right, same thing. Like if I wanted to have a bigger house, well, what new responsibilities are there? Well, there's gonna be more taxes, and I might need to get trash pickup, and the yard might need, the yard might be too big for me to handle. What are the responsibilities that come with this? And I think sometimes we get so excited about the possibilities and the money and like the next thing that sometimes we forget that like there's actually new responsibilities that come with this thing. So anyways, you want to take a look. All right. Then you're going to also want to take a look and see, all right, well, what responsibilities am I holding? Well, where am I? Where is my energy of holding this all together going? Does it? And then we can start to evaluate from there. Does it make sense? These new responsibilities are going to be required for this level of success. Can I hold all of it myself? Do I need to let some go? Do I need to ask for help? And sometimes it's things like you can get the levels of support in at the lower level. Like, for example, like getting a housekeeper, right? And so that takes the responsibility of cleaning off of a plate, right? Or you could get a VA to do your social media and it takes some of that responsibility. This is the place then where you can start to look at like, all right, well, what levels of support do I need? And then the question is, well, what support do they need to be able to hold this responsibility? So like, for example, if you just have somebody if you just don't give it, like, let's just say you hire somebody to do your socials and then you don't pay them any attention and you're like, well, why isn't this working? Or you're like, I don't like the content that's coming out. And it's going to be like, well, yeah, you didn't train them. You didn't give them enough instructions on what it is that you want or how to make you happy or what it is required. Like, which is funny because this sounds really obvious, but I'll tell you, when I'm working with clients in business, a lot of times people be like, it's not worth it for me to hire somebody because I still have to do it myself. And I'm like, well, that just to me says like you need systems and training and like you need to train the staff. Like you can't just expect somebody to be able to carry this responsibility with no training on what it is you want and need. Right. So anyways, so once we look at like, all right, so these new responsibilities are coming online. All right, cool. These are the responsibilities I'm currently holding. What responsibilities should I be letting go of? What does that take? And then how do I hold on to these next level responsibilities? Now, at this point, as you're exploring these things, I would really encourage you, if you're trying to grow and scale your business, pretty much any place that you're holding somebody else's responsibility other than for your children. And I do not mean adult children, I mean children. Other than that, you should really not be holding responsibility for people. And the reason is most of the time it's really just a lack of emotional range. So it's like if you could handle your own feelings, a lot of the over functioning, a lot of the over showing up, the over delivering, carrying other people's feelings or stories or state or whatever else, like if you can just handle what it feels like to be in the car with somebody who's in a bad mood and you're okay, you could just kind of put that down, which I really would encourage because you just waste energy carrying other people's shit. Now, also, I want to just mention here too. So a lot of my clients are the primary breadwinners in their families. And I think that's I don't know that we're going to get too far into that in this episode, but we have to make sure that the financial responsibility on our business is appropriate. I'm going to tell you a quick story. So I had a client a while ago, and she had a business that was a relatively successful, but she was trying to get her business to run her whole lifestyle with us and keep her spouse at home. And and I'm just like, this business is it was a relatively new business, like only a few years old. And she was essentially just putting too much, like she was taking on too much responsibility, and that was putting too much pressure on the business. And so there was never any money to invest. There was never any money to do things because all of the money that came through the business needed to go right. She needed to pay herself. And where I'm going with this is like her spouse wasn't really doing any contributing financially. Not to say that the spouse wasn't contributing, because they were, but it just wasn't financial. And so that put a lot of pressure on her and a lot of pressure on the business. And so we have to really look at the financial responsibility too. And everybody's situation is going to be different, around these things. But this is a super common theme where the women who are breadwinners oftentimes are holding almost completely all of the household financial responsibilities. And I think that there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. And when we go to expand and we go to hold more, I think sometimes it can just cause an inner conflict where we're like, I actually don't want that much more. I can't hold too much more, especially if there's a lot of pressure, especially if there's any lack or there's anything like that. So anyways, so as you start to evaluate, all right, well, where are these new responsibilities? What am I holding? What can I let go of? And then how do I get the support, and how do I make sure that how do I take responsibility for their success without taking responsibility for the task? Right? So you move your responsibility up a notch to like, how do I get my team to do X, Y, and Z? How do I make sure they're trained and supported and whatever else, while giving them the full responsibility for the work? And so what I notice when people don't have a great relationship with responsibility is I see a lot of chasing money, or a lot of like, well, if I just had enough money, I could solve all my problems kind of mentality around this. And I just want to point this out because I think we don't really explore our relationship with money and responsibility all that often. They're usually not really brought up together, but they are for sure very intertwined. And when we want that next level money, it comes with next level responsibility. And so if you want the money, but you don't want the responsibility, that's the place where like we set ourselves up for that inner conflict. And essentially, like, depending on how hard you push at this direction, like this is a place where self-sabotage happens. And then people will say things to me like, oh, I have an upper limit problem, or I have a fear of success. And I'm just like, well, maybe you're afraid of the success, or maybe you're afraid of holding the success. Right? Maybe you're afraid of the responsibility. And I like to be really nitty gritty with my language around these things, because I think it really, really matters. Like when we say, oh, I'm afraid of success, it's so vague and it's so unhelpful. And there's like, well, what solution would you suggest? Being you're afraid, you don't want to be a success, like, like whatever. It's like, no, when you're actually afraid of responsibility because you're holding too much, or because, you actually don't have the capacity for more, you have to put things down. You need to upgrade your social circle. You actually can't trust people to do these things. And sometimes when you can't trust people to do certain things, like sometimes that's our own bullshit, to be honest, and doesn't necessarily mean that the other person isn't trustworthy. But yeah. All right. So, anyways, I hope this gives you like a framework for thinking about fear of success, fear of responsibility, what fear of responsibility actually looks like, and then kind of give you a framework for how to hold that next level of responsibility in a way where it's not overwhelming, where it's like just right. All right. So I will talk to you next week. I love you so much. And again, if you want to talk to me about working together to scale your business, go ahead and click one of the links and you'll find that says book a call, and you can schedule some time to talk to me. All right. Bye, everybody.